Hi students, welcome back to the second of two videos on family support. If you haven't seen the first, watch the first one first. I find German family support services really interesting. These are services supporting parents in their child raising and supporting children in being raised. Germany has a tradition of preventative services, so what we've got here is a catalogue of family support services. And I'm going to go through that catalogue, literally one by one, describe these concrete services to you in the course of this video. Before I continue, have you noticed I've been to the hairdressers, I've had my hair cut. My wife did this to the whole family. She did the whole family all together in the garden. And it's a lovely spring day. The little birds were watching us with great interest. The birds are nesting right now. And when we hopped off to have a shower, to clean up, the birds dived down and grabbed that hair. Now, I was expecting my children's soft, mousy hair to be much more attractive to the birds. I thought they'd all be wanting to grab my children's soft hair. But interestingly, they weren't. They were going for my grey hair and lifting it up and taking it away to their nests. So there you are. My grey hair is high status if you're a Munster bird. And all of the bird nests in the Frampton family's garden now have a silver lining. Isn't that lovely? Hey, let me get back to this catalogue of family support services. Where were we? Sorry, I've lost you, haven't I? So to recap, 8 particular, specific, preventative family support services. The services described there a peculiar mix, a particular mix. It's a real funny constellation, shaped by the history of German social work. Many of these services have a very long tradition in Germany, going back way beyond this law. The law dates from the late 1980s, but the services in part may be decades older still. Most of these are authentic German methods, often influenced by social pedagogy ideas of a context of German society. And as well as those made in Germany methods, we have some imported US methods. And I find this question quite interesting. Whilst you watch, a question for you to think about is, how German is this? Is this really made in Germany, or is it an American import? For each one, ask yourself which. Let's kick off at the beginning of this list. The first one they explicitly mention is child and family consultation. Now, you can also call this family counselling. You can also call it child guidance. It's offered to children, to young people, and to families, and indeed, in many cases, collectively. Deals with, the lawmaker notes, individual and family problems and their underlying factors. So the idea is that you have a time to get below the surface to the real source of the issues. The lawmaker notes this should resolve child-raising questions, and the lawmaker also says it can help deal with questions of separation or questions of divorce. Is it German? Is it international? I think this really is a classic international social work method. And I'm sure in Britain and America, they've been doing this for more than 100 years. They were certainly doing it in Britain 70 years ago on Hunky Dory. David sings about this. You might even know the song. And these children that you spit on as they try to change their world, they're immune to your consultations, but quite aware of what they're going through. So there you are, you had it in Britain 5 decades ago. What about the next one? Is the next one made in Germany? Social group work doesn't sound like it's made in Germany, you might say. It's a very American social work method, isn't it? Social group work, please note, not for the parents, but instead for the children, specifically for older children. Helps the child overcome developmental difficulties and behavioural problems. It's based on a group pedagogical concept. So think social pedagogy, think outdoor education, think working with creative media, think youth work, don't think horseshoe-shaped circle of chairs with lots of people speaking gloomily. It's really a more active, child-friendly version of the social group work that we think of with adults. The lawmaker, the legislator notes, supports social learning in the group. Yeah, is it American? Is it German? The title is obviously from the US, and group work really came from the US to Germany in the post-war years, with done by often US German citizens anyway. So there's a strange kind of hybrid form here. When I read about the group pedagogical concept, I have to say, here I'm convinced this is a variant of group work, very much made in Germany. It's got social pedagogy's fingerprints all over it. And we could even describe it as being some kind of social group pedagogy, if you like. For me, it's a very German intervention in this catalogue. Let's move on. I had some translation problems with the next section. Something like individual mentoring. The idea, the adult mentor or supporter befriends and supports the child, typically the older child, doing activities together with the child. Helps the child to, the legislator notes, cope with developmental problems. The social environment must be involved. So the mentor's bringing in the various stakeholders, the various involved people in the young person's life. The mentor counsels and helps the child to become independent, but parallel to this, the mentor works parallel to maintain the life reference point to the family. And again, I'm quoting the legislator here. This is made explicit. In the process of becoming independent, of course, there's the danger that we could somehow damage the child's relationship to their birth family. But the idea of this intervention is to prevent the need for removing that child from the birth family. You know, yes, we have the possibilities of foster care and children's homes, but we want to avoid that if possible. This intervention is one of many designed to avoid the idea of a child living out of family. So there you are, maintaining the relationship to the birth family, that's a priority here. Is it German? Is it international? I think, once again, maybe a bit of both. You certainly get such methods in various countries' social work. Particularly for me, maybe speaking as an Anglo-Saxon, in the context of youth justice, you might have the idea of a special figure developing a relationship with the young person. Nonetheless, in this form, I think it really looks quite German. There you are. And I couldn't really satisfyingly translate the title of the intervention either. So maybe this one is more or less made in Germany. The next one, number 4 on our list, certainly looks made in Germany. Look at this, social pedagogical family support. Intensive support for families. The lawmaker notes, the legislator uses the term help to self-help. Germans are very familiar with that concept and often give it in a definition of social work itself. Good. What's the idea? The professional comes into the family, comes into the household, so to say, and spends time with the family in their everyday. Now, I'm guessing in practice, this means in a time of day such as the late afternoon. You know, maybe kids are doing homework, you know, one of the parents is helping them with the homework, maybe the other parents cooking, maybe, that kind of situation. The professional helps and advises with child-raising tasks, goes through conflict and crisis resolution, liaises, makes contact with other offices, with other agencies, makes referrals. It's a long-term intervention, and the family are expected to actively participate. Is it German? Is it US? I mean, the title makes it look so uniquely German, doesn't it? That's such a wonderfully German-sounding intervention title. On the other hand, I think this really links into earlier traditions of the social worker working closely with a family. Anglo-Saxon social work in the last 2-3 decades has evolved into a kind of organizational case management kind of thing. But before that period, you know, when I was a kid in the 1970s, the social worker would be expected to have a close relationship to the family and to do real direct work with those family members. Maybe this is simply in an older tradition of Anglo-Saxon services as well. So there you are. Despite the Germanic sounding title, I think this is very much a traditional international model of social work with families with difficulties. I like it. The next one, group daycare. I have to explain the context here. When I came to Germany, I saw something very strange happening. School children walking home from school at something like 11:45 in the morning. You know, so just before midday, the little sprogglers were walking home. And I thought to myself, what's going on here? In Germany, there's a tradition of schools offering half-day schooling. Okay, and because the school would close at midday, mums would only work part-time, if at all, and they would be stay-at-home mums, at least in the afternoons. So the kids would be walking home to have their midday meal at home with mum. Good. And in this context, you then have to question, what does the child do after school? You know, a large part of the day the child will spend with its family. This is designed to be an alternative to that. In group daycare, you have afternoon activities. The child doesn't go back home to the birth family at the end of the early school day ending, but instead goes to some kind of institutional setting for the afternoon. And in that institutional setting, the child participates in activities such as homework support with other children. At the same time, there'll be parental involvement. So the staff of that agency, they're going to be spending time with the child, but also liaising with the parents and inviting the parents to particular sessions and so on. The goal ultimately, like many in this catalogue, supporting the child in staying in their birth family. And of course, the principle here is quite beautiful. You know, at some point in the evening, the child will go home, will spend part of the evening with its birth family, you know, sleep in the bed, in its bedroom in the birth family. Good. And it's typically done in a children's home, you know, parallel to kids who are actually residing in that home. There'll be kids that are using it as daycare or similar kind of place. It can also be done with a kind of afternoon foster carer, if you like. That's a variant of this model. Is it international? Is it German? I think because it fits so much in terms of the German family life or the German school day or the gendered working day in Germany, I think this is certainly made in Germany. It may even be dying out right now. Certainly school days are much longer now in 2020 than they were 20 years ago. My kids can stay at school until 3 o'clock if they want to, almost like in the Anglo-Saxon countries. The next couple are much more traditional social work methods, full-time foster care. Fostering should take into account the age and development of a child and their personal ties, meaning relationships, as well as the possibilities of improvement to the child-raising conditions in the birth family. In other words, when the child is being fostered, the social worker is investigating ways to help the birth family become more settled, again, thinking of the child returning. It can be short-term, but it can be long-term. If you're interested, the idea of permanence is also very big in Germany too. The legislation notes suitable forms of foster care should be created or established for children with developmental impairments. Now, when I read that, I think of kids who are disabled, but I think the meaning here more is to do with mental health questions, and particularly, you know, questions of traumatized children, children that had to leave families with particularly severe problems. And for such traumatized children, the German social work system has what you might call professional foster carers. So your foster carer will themselves have a social work qualification. Interesting, huh? So again, you know, fostering in Germany, quite diverse, as well as for standard foster carers, you also have these professional foster carers too. I'm whizzing through the catalogue. Last but one is residential care in a home, in a residential unit for children. The legislation has interesting formulations here. Look at this. This sounds professional. Supporting development by combining everyday experiences with pedagogical and therapeutic services. The objective of the services is, well, preparing the child for either one of the following three options. Number one, a return to the birth family. Number two, raising in another family. In other words, option two is preparing the child for foster care. Or we have option three, a long-term stay living in the home. Isn't that interesting? So when you're initially working with the child, you have these three possible objectives in your mind. In the course of the period that follows, you'll be becoming more concrete. And ideally, the workers and the manager will have these concrete objectives in their minds all the time in their work with the child. The legislation gives additional duties to the home. The young person is to be advised and supported in questions of training and employment, as well as general lifestyle questions. And again, the richness of the detail here, you know, I'm citing phrases from this law. Maybe it helps you get a picture for just how much the German social work law shapes the social work practice that social workers are doing. You know, it really is giving us a lot of guidance here with straightforward concepts which we can follow. The last in my catalogue of German family support services, again, I'm struggling to translate, but you might describe this as being something like one-to-one intermediate treatment. Designed specifically for older children, teenagers specifically, who require intensive support for social integration and to lead an independent life. And the careful words of a legislator there are expressing the fact that this is also designed for older children, but have, quite severe difficulties, children whose relationships are problematic and difficult. So this is really for kids that need a lot of support. It's one-to-one help. We're talking about long-term intervention, responding to that young person's particular needs. The professional, the social worker or the pedagogue who does this, does various activities. Think of, say, outdoor education, that kind of thing with the young person. Building up a relationship, and that relationship should strengthen the young person in their development, in their social integration possibilities. So here you are. This is the last in our catalogue. Oh, I've forgotten to say whether that's Anglo-Saxon or German. Obviously, the last two were very international, weren't they? This one, again, I would know this from youth justice in the UK, but not necessarily from conventional mainstream family support services. So in the family support context, this is certainly a nice German concept here. Well, I'll come to a close here. I'd love to guide you to English language literature on this. As far as I know, there isn't any. The particular law itself hasn't been translated, so you'll just have to learn German if you want to know more, or simply ask me. Hope you've enjoyed both of these presentations. Thank you for listening.